History is being written in real time, and it's not by Donald Trump. It's by South Africa, standing tall in the face of economic blackmail. What started as Trump's petty retaliation for South Africa's independent choices has now sparked a global realignment. After South Africa supported Palestinian human rights, deepened ties with China and Russia, and finally began confronting its painful colonial past through long overdue land reform, the Trump administration decided to punish the country, not diplomatically, but cruelly. In a move that shocked human rights advocates worldwide, Trump cut U.S. aid to South Africa, including healthcare funds that helped treat thousands of HIV patients. The message was chilling. If you don't bend to Washington's will, your ill people will suffer. But South Africa didn't flinch, and the world took notice. Instead of isolating South Africa, Trump may have just handed it the global spotlight. Within weeks of the aid freeze, the European Union and China declared full support, offering more than $5 billion in strategic investments to the country. That's over 15 times the amount of aid Trump froze. This wasn't just financial support, it was a diplomatic earthquake. The EU and China didn't just pledge money, they pledged loyalty, cooperation, and partnership with South Africa's sovereign path. And they did it loudly. But how did we get here, to the moment where U.S. allies chose Pretoria over Washington? What's the inside story? In this video, let's find out. The spark that ignited Donald Trump's aggressive retaliation against South Africa wasn't just the country's land reform policy. It was the deeper symbolism of a formerly colonized African nation daring to assert its sovereignty. South Africa's bold move challenged the long-standing global order in which Western economic dominance is rarely confronted by countries from the global South. The Land Expropriation Act, passed by the ANC government under President Cyril Ramaphosa, was not designed as revenge against white landowners, but as a constitutional effort to correct the generational injustices left by apartheid. During apartheid, over 87% of the land was violently taken and reserved for the white minority, while the black majority was pushed into poverty, denied access to fertile land, and excluded from wealth-building opportunities. Even 3 decades after the end of apartheid, land ownership remained painfully skewed. White population, despite being about 7% of the population, controls over 72% of farmlands. However, the new policy allowed for the seizure of unused and underutilized land without compensation, primarily targeting vast commercial farms owned by white corporations or absentee landlords. This was a long overdue move to return the land to the people who were forcibly removed from it, giving them a chance to participate in agriculture, housing development, and economic growth. However, to Trump, this was a problem. Instead of acknowledging South Africa's right to address its apartheid legacy, Trump framed the land reform as an act of racial hostility. He pushed a narrative commonly found in far-right U.S. media that claimed white farmers were being targeted, a baseless conspiracy that had already circulated in extremist circles online. Trump used this narrative as a pretext to punish South Africa. He signed an executive order to freeze all U.S. aid to the country, which was roughly below $500 million. But the cruelty wasn't just in the amount. Much of that aid was directed at public health initiatives, especially in the fight against HIV and AIDS and in maternal health care. South Africa has one of the highest HIV rates globally, and cutting this funding jeopardized the lives of thousands of patients, including pregnant women, rural families, and those dependent on antiretroviral treatments. The aid freeze sent a brutal message. If you challenge U.S. interests, even your sick and vulnerable will suffer. Trump's motivations weren't just about land reform. He was enraged by South Africa's growing closeness with Russia and China, and by its bold support for Palestine at the International Court of Justice. South Africa had gone from being a strategic partner to a defiant actor in the international arena, and Trump wanted to make an example of it. In his view, South Africa had committed 3 unforgivable acts. It sought to reverse racial inequality through land reform, supported the Palestinian cause, and deepened alliances with America's chief global rivals. But what Trump failed to anticipate was how these punitive actions would backfire spectacularly. Instead of isolating South Africa, he inspired global solidarity around it. Far from retreating under American pressure, South Africa took a bold and principled stand. President Cyril Ramaphosa refused to soften the land reform. He didn't issue apologies or backtrack on his country's support for Palestine. He didn't distance himself from Beijing or Moscow. Instead, he made it clear that South Africa would no longer let foreign powers dictate its moral or political agenda. This defiance became a rallying cry, not only across the African continent, but throughout the Global South and the broader BRICS alliance. But the most surprising reaction came from the Global North, with the EU delivering the first blow to Trump by standing for South Africa. The European Union's $5 billion investment package into South Africa wasn't just a development deal. It was a political earthquake. In a world where American foreign policy has often dictated the mood of the West, this moment marked a visible fracture. The funds, pledged during the EU-South Africa bilateral summit in Cape Town, were directed at three pivotal areas: green energy, vaccine manufacturing, and industrial development. These aren't just development sectors. They are the cornerstones of long-term economic independence. And that's precisely the message the EU was sending. If Washington wants to punish sovereignty, Europe is ready to reward it. Before we continue further, tell us, are you enjoying the video? If yes, please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black Africa. Let's continue now. The symbolism of the investment could not have come at a more potent moment. It followed Donald Trump's decision to freeze U.S. aid to South Africa as retaliation for the Land Expropriation Act, Pretoria's support for Palestine at the International Court of Justice, and its growing closeness with Russia and China. In effect, Trump had tried to isolate South Africa. The EU's response was to embrace it. That $5 billion wasn't merely about financial cooperation, it was a direct attack on Trump's sanctions-first approach. It signaled that transatlantic unity no longer means falling in line with U.S. ideology, and that Europe is now prepared to chart its own independent foreign policy in Africa. At the summit, the EU made its intentions clear, not just through words, but through presence. High-level representatives from the bloc's most powerful member states stood alongside South African leaders, not behind them. Germany's ambassador to South Africa, Andreas Peschke, emphasized the deep historical and constitutional ties between the two nations, particularly around democratic values and legal reform. Italy's Alberto Vecchi highlighted a mutual commitment to multilateralism, echoing the growing sentiment that global problems, whether climate change, inequality, or post-colonial justice, require collective action, not coercive diplomacy. And France's David Martignon reinforced the shared belief in a non-racial, non-sexist democratic future, openly supporting South Africa's constitutional model as one worth defending on the world stage. These statements, when viewed together, were more than diplomatic courtesy. They constituted a coordinated political statement that Europe was no longer comfortable with America's punitive, unilateral approach. By throwing its support behind South Africa, the EU was signaling that it would not stand by as nations were bullied for pursuing their own post-colonial reforms or for defying Israel in global forums. In fact, the EU went even further by praising South Africa's G20 presidency as visionary, at the very moment when the United States chose to boycott the same summit out of protest. However, one thing should be noticed: the EU is not supporting South Africa because of goodwill, and that it really respects it. Rather, it's because as of now, it's in the EU's interest to support South Africa, a country with which the United States is uncomfortable. And yet, while Europe's support carried immense diplomatic weight, China's response was far more aggressive, deliberate, and strategic. It didn't just offer political cover. It offered a long-term economic lifeline. Trade between China and South Africa reached an all-time high of $52.5 billion in 2024, a staggering figure that placed South Africa at the top of Beijing's African trade relationships. What makes this relationship unique is not just the volume, but the balance. South Africa maintains a trade surplus of $8.83 billion with China. For a global South country, that's not only rare, but also revolutionary. In an era where many developing nations run chronic deficits with their partners, South Africa's ability to profit from its partnership with China offers a new model for economic empowerment. This trade surplus became even more significant when Trump's aid freeze hit. Instead of retreating or begging for Western re-engagement, China stepped in with a stronger economic embrace. Chinese Ambassador Wu Peng didn't just offer vague words of support. He outlined concrete new initiatives. Infrastructure projects, industrial corridors, and expanded trade routes were all included under the next phase of the Belt and Road Initiative, which China promised would be accelerated in South Africa. These aren't short-term lifelines. These are long-term structural commitments to integrating South Africa into the heart of China's global economic network. The clearest signal came from Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who confirmed he would attend the G20 Foreign Ministers meeting in Johannesburg, a deliberate counter to the U.S. boycott. China was not merely offering rhetorical support, it was physically and diplomatically showing up. And that matters, especially in Africa, where visibility and engagement often outweigh promises made in closed-door meetings. While Washington made excuses about anti-American policies, Beijing doubled down on its commitment to South Africa's leadership on the world stage. Trump's approach has not only isolated America from South Africa, it's created a power vacuum across the African continent. By abandoning the continent, Trump has surrendered Africa to his rivals, and they are not just gaining contracts, they are gaining influence. What do you think? Should South Africa allow the EU to come closer and make the United States nervous while reaping benefits from it? Isn't it true that partnership from the EU should be handled with care in the long run because the EU has been a historic ally of the US? In the comment section right below, share your thoughts on whether South Africa should quicken its land reform efforts to send a message that it will not be bullied. Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If yes, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We bring videos on Black Africa, its history, rich arts and culture, and things the world should know about. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.